My colleagues, we are back from recess. We are now on page 18, Guam Academy Charter School Council. I know that the Vice Speaker has an amendment being drafted. Does any of my colleagues have any questions for the Guam Academy Charter School Council? Page 18 and 19. Senator Paris?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question regarding a question that was posed to a superintendent, and now that we have a DOA here, I think they can address that question probably.
Okay, if you have the question, go ahead. Please feel free to ask,
okay.
Mr. Byrne.
Yeah, so Mr. Byrne, there was a question that I asked regarding tax amnesty funds, and what is your knowledge of that fund? And because it was mentioned that they were not allotted or provided that funding. So if you can give some information regarding that fund and why and how they did not receive that funding.
Yes, Senator, thank you. The amnesty appropriation was passed by the previous legislature almost at the end of the tax amnesty program. In that respect, and as you can see from the audited reports, the actual receipts on the tax amnesty were about 29 million. The forecast was, I believe, 33 to 35 million. So we never reached the forecast that was made at the time that the appropriation was considered. So we were unable, because the money had been spent principally on tax refunds, to refund any of that particular allocation to GDOE. But I would also like to point out that if you look at our financial statements, and there's a comment on the MD&A, that's the Management Discussion and Analysis, on the general fund progress, that shows the general fund progress over the last 10 years, that GDOE overspent by 2.6 million and thus contributed to the deficit that was finally reported at the end of the year of about 10.4 million. So I would say that they actually did get their money and a little bit more because they spent it.
So GDOE overspent $2.6 million in the year 2018, and
That's correct.
You're saying that if they had received the $1 million, that's already, or how does that relate to the?
If they'd received the $1 million, that simply would have reduced the deficit to 1.6 million. They spent it anyway.
Okay, so that's something that we need to follow up with. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Senator Parrish, you have anything else? Okay, thank you. Vice Speaker, while legal is drafting your amendment for the textbooks, I'll have Senator Tello. You have an amendment. Were you able to pass that out already?
Yes, Mr. Chair. In fact, I'm working with OFB right now to ensure the language is incorporated in there to allow. So if you can just allow a few minutes while they're checking to see if that language is there.
Okay. Does Senator Kelly, you have questions you want to ask?
Hungin. So we've been talking about the issue of per pupil cost, and I noticed in the language here, it says that there is $6,150 per enrollee in the charter school system, that this is the actual enrollment at the time multiplied by the per pupil cost as established by this section. So in the establishment of this per pupil cost in this section, how was this calculated? Was there a formula, not to overuse the term formula today, but was there a formula for it? Did it include certain certain things that were meant to be supporting the student? Is it just a general cost?
In case, stand by. My understanding is if you look at the enrollees, as you find on page 18, such as line 20, 21, and 22, your question is, you take the amount, 6150 times the number of enrollees. What was your question specifically? What it was for?
Again, so when we were talking about textbooks earlier, we were talking about trying to understand the per pupil cost and what it entailed. Is it operations only? Is it operations and supplies and textbooks? How was this 6,150
Well, Senator
achieved?
Kelly, the Vice Speaker, they're just allowing legal to finish the crafting of that amendment to allow the funding from DOE to provide textbooks also for charter school, if I'm correct, right? Vice Speaker, maybe you can speak to that. I mean, because that's related to what your question is.
Right, but
Yes,
the cost, I'm sorry, the cost was calculated by OFB, or who calculated that cost of 6,150, so I can understand what was wrapped up in that cost?
Mr. Chair, if I may, point of
Yes,
information.
Vice Speaker.
So last term, we had to drop the original appropriation from 6,500 to 6,088 because of the Trump tax cuts. And I believe that now we're trying to reestablish that 6,500 amount. However, in the budget, we cannot meet that amount. So we're slowly trying to move up the cost per pupil for the charter schools, and within the way that the law was originally written to allow the charter schools to go ahead and form. That cost, the 6,500 is originally for the intent of operations, and so that's from my understanding, from what I've spoken with members of the councils in the past. And however, you know, to the previous speaker's concern, really the question when we first started moving the number from 6,500 to 6,088, like how was that formulated in previous legislatures? And they really just tried to find an equitable amount. I don't know what the formula really was, but now we're just trying to slowly get them back up to that $6,500 mark. And just for the record, there were also some concerns last term that at DOE, you cannot compare apples to oranges, but at DOE, their cost per student was around $11,000, a little over $11,000 per pupil cost, if that helps. Thank you,
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
thank you. Now, I'll have OFB now explain what that funding was for.
Yes, Senator Marsh. What it was is that we took the existing cost per pupil, which I believe is the 6088. And what we did is we tried to see whether or not we can come up with a reasonable amount to make sure that it included, of course, all costs associated to run DOE. So what we did is we took the 6088 and we bumped it up. We tried using 6,250. When we did that analysis, the amount was just too enormous. We actually tried 6,500. And that was just way out of the ballpark. So what we had to do was come back. So we took the median between 6088 and 6,250 and came up with this 6,180. That's how we came up with the current amount that we're using per pupil in the budget, and that's how this amount for GDOE was actually determined, by using that 1,650 amount per pupil.
Seduce Masi, both to the former senator who spoke and yourself, I was trying to see if we could get to that understanding, since GDOE seems to not be entirely clear on it either. So it helps me understand the context, because of course we want to make sure that people have their needs being met, but to be doing it in the way that it was intended. So it seems that there needs to be further research in that just for clarification purposes.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Now, my colleagues, there is amendment. You should have all received, you're done, or, okay. That Vice Speaker is proffering. Ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have an amendment on lines 5 to 3 from page 18 to 19. And this amendment reads, on section 1, to scratch out the word council and to replace it with the word fund. In section 2, just to make it consistent, to again scratch out the word council and replace it with the word fund. And then to include here Department of Administration, to scratch out Guam Academy Charter School Council and to replace with Department of Administration. And then scroll down a little bit past section 3 to remove the word council and replace it with fund. And then in the back again, just to make things consistent, we removed which shall be remitted and placed the word and. I'm just going to read it. To amend the bill to read Section 1, Legislative Intent, it is the intent of the Legislature in Guam to provide a lump sum appropriation to the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council. We scratched out council and put Guam Academy Charter Schools Fund for the purpose of the Guam Academy Charter Schools operations and administration. The sum of $10,516,500 is appropriated to the Guam Academy Charter School Council. We scratched out the word council, and it now reads Guam Academy Charter School Fund from the general fund to support the operations in fiscal year 2020. Notwithstanding any other provision of law pursuant to subsection 12116E, Chapter 12, Title 17 GCA, the Guam Academy Charter School Council, we crossed that out and put Department of Administration, is hereby authorized and directed to deduct in proportion to the ratio of cash received from the total fiscal year 2020 general fund appropriations in section 2 of this part of this chapter to the Guam Academy Charter School Council. We crossed out council and replaced it with fund. $6,150 per enrollee based on the actual enrollment at the time multiplied by the per pupil cost as established by this section. The Guam Academy Charter Schools Council shall not exceed appropriations for 620 students. For the iLearn Academy Charter School, 740 students. And for the Guam Academy Charter School, let me read that again. The Guam Academy Charter Schools Council shall not exceed appropriations for 620 students for the iLearn Academy Charter, 740 students for the Guam Academy Charter School, and 350 students for the Sciences Fund and Awesome Academy Charter School. Each Academy Charter School shall submit monthly invoices to the Guam Academy Charter School Council shall submit monthly invoices to the Guam Academy Charter School Council, which shall be remitted, which shall be remitted out, and inputted the word and, to the Department of Administration. Upon receipt of remitted invoice, we crossed out remitted and put invoices. DOA shall verify accuracy of the invoice and report its finding to the respective Academy Charter Schools within 10 working days of receipt of said invoice by the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council is crossed out prior to the release of funds. If the Guam Academy Charter School Council is crossed out, DOA fails to report its findings, the invoiced amount received by DOA shall be automatically transmitted to each Academy Charter School. So I know that perhaps it's a lot, but really we are just replacing. Initially, this bill had the Guam Academy Charter School Council. For what reason, I don't know why. They don't have a special fund, or they don't have a fund. The council does not have their own fund. And so we're just making sure that it says the Guam Academy Charter School Fund, because that fund is already established. And also the Guam Academy Charter School, the Section 3, it says the Guam Academy Charter School, notwithstanding any other provision law, is hereby authorized and directed to deduct. That is not the function of the council in accordance with the statute. So I don't know why that was put in there either. I understand that there was an issue or a challenge with the previous council where they were at the certification office, and that created a conflict of interest because also the certification office is also tasked to do some investigative findings for issues that are within the education system. And so that's why we moved the certification office away from this, away from the charter schools, because there was that conflict in the law. And so we worked with you to ensure that Department of Administration received an appropriation to help supplement, to provide personnel, and I have another amendment forthcoming to provide full-time personnel to work out the issues full-time with the challenges that the council needs. And so really, for what reason, maybe there was some confusion because there is no, Guam Academy Charter School Council does not have a fund existing. So just to make it right, within relation to the law, there is a fund, and so we're replacing that with the fund. And in the second page, in section 3, there was the shall be remitted to the Department of Administration. So some of the challenges here in section 3, where we had to cross out the Guam Academy Charter School Council prior to the release of funds, there was an AG opinion, I believe last term, if not prior, where there were some challenges because DOE was validating these invoices, and these invoices were not getting validated on time, or these invoices were not validated at all. So if they needed supplies, they would not get it in time for that school year. If they needed books or perhaps some maintenance done in their facilities, it was not getting to them. It was not being approved during that school year. So there was that conflict there. And so really the AG had to come in and opine on the issue and said that, that the ruling of DOE is just to validate and confirm that this is a legitimate invoice. You should not question, put into question whether they needed to rechange the light and say, oh, okay, well, we're going to replace it with a recycled or refurbished light bulb, rather than give you the authority to purchase a new light bulb for the students, when we all know recycled and refurbished is something far less par and less expensive. So this is the amendment, Mr. Chair, just trying to fix some of the issues within the bill, and then that's all I have to say.
Okay. Madam Speaker?
Sizos Masi, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Chair, I just want to say that I stand and rise in support of this amendment by the good Vice Speaker, but I just want to make sure that I'm reading it right on the appropriation section on Section 2. She talks about the changes from the charter schools to the fund, right? Mm-hmm. And then for the purpose of the Guam Academy Charter Schools operation. Is that correct? Right? And instead of asking legal to work this, I just want to walk it down. She changes the council to the Department of Administration, which is fine. And then she, on the second to the last line, so I just need the clarification, the Guam Academy Charter School Council, is that?
That's correct.
So we're talking about
I'm
this-
sorry, Mr. Chair, can I did not hear the question. If it was,
I just want to make sure that as we're talking about the GACs versus the council, that everything is consistent, and I don't want to make the same mistake. So if it can just to clarify, as she was going down line by line, I was trying to just follow along with her. So when I started on Section 2, it says, well, we'll go back to Section 1. On Section 1, second line, it says Guam Academy Charter Schools Fund.
Correct.
So the S is after school and then fund, right? On section 2, the sum of $10 million, $10,516,500 is appropriated to the Guam Academy Charter School Fund or Schools Fund? That's section 2.
Madam Vice, did you want to put an S after each time it says Guam Academy Charter
No.
Schools? Or
So I'm just
not
trying to
plural?
make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Chair,
1 minute.
it's the Guam Academy Charter School Fund.
Or school, not schools. Okay, so everywhere where
It's
there's
the fund.
S, it'll be school fund, correct?
Right.
Right?
Right, so if my colleagues, as you see all the amendment, just scratch off the S after the word school. It'll be school, not plural, fun.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds better.
Is that all, Mr. Chair?
So
Is that,
if it addresses that, and if it's school and not schools.
Right.
And making sure that when we talk about the appropriation to the school fund,
that's correct.
then to the second to the last line of the first page, under section 3, second to the last line, is it correct to say the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council? Or is that a deleted?
Are you talking about page 19, ma'am?
I'm talking about page 18 and 19, yes, on section 3. I want to make sure, I support the efforts, I just want to make sure that we're doing it correct in every version of and instead of just doing a technical
Okay, so-
correction, I want to make sure that every line that
Correct.
talks about the school fund versus the schools council,
That's
if there
correct.
needs to be
Okay.
fixed. I wanted, so maybe we can
Okay.
do it section by section on this amendment and ask for
Well,
an objection.
I think, Madam Speaker, let me ask this to the Vice, because I'm looking at the same thing you're looking at, and it's real simple. Madam Vice, if you look to line 19, if you look at line 19, it says the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council. I think that should say fund, maybe, to be consistent with what the speaker's asking and what you have, because the fund cannot exceed the amount appropriate. It's not the council.
I know, that's
Yeah,
why.
no, I'm asking the Vice Speaker, correct? This is what, maybe Mr. Byrne can comment? Or why don't we just take
Can we take a quick recess? Let me
Okay.
pull up the law and make sure if it's schools or school fund, and if it's schools council or school council, to make it administrative error, because we're so concerned with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
please. Thank you. Let's take a moment recess. We're back from recess. Madam Vice Speaker,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to make it very clear, it should be school council
right?
and schools fund.
Okay,
Now, I just want to point out that in some areas of the law, there is some technical inconsistency. So if need be, we'll go back and amend the statute to make sure that everything is right-sized, right? So if we're
Okay.
going to say school council, we're going to say school council and not schools council.
Got it.
If we're going to say schools fund, we're going to say schools fund and not school fund. And so we'll make that, there's errors in the current statute, so we'll make that correction as we move forward this month or next. But right now, we are saying it is school council and schools fund.
school council.
Yes.
School, not plural, and when we're talking about the council, it's schools, plural, council, right?
Right, SCHOOLS, fund.
Okay, fund,
And then when we discuss the council, is SCHOOL, council.
okay,
I'm good.
all right,
So just Masi.
okay.
So I still have the floor.
Yes, Madam Speaker, you have the floor. You still have the floor.
So, Mr. Chair, in all fairness, based on the enabling legislation and what we have today, maybe a motion to have legal correct, make sure that all the technical corrections that are needed on this section is afforded so that we get the intent of
Yes,
the enabling legislation.
All
So
right.
my motion for that.
okay. Does any other member like to speak on the amendment?
There's a motion, sir?
Oh, a motion to
There's
make
a
it technical?
motion,
I apologize.
On that amendment, to ask legal to
Is
make
there
it-
any objection for a motion to ask legal to make the technical corrections?
If any.
If any? None? Pass.
Thank you.
Does any member want to speak on the amendment? Let me get Senator Torres, ma'am?
Mr. Chair, I just want to rise in support of this amendment. It's a very, very good amendment because it makes the language in the Budget Act consistent with the language in 17 GCA Chapter 12. And so I just want to note that in looking at that segment of the law, this is precisely accurate. So I'm full support of it.
Thank you. Senator Paris?
Just point of inquiry. So on the second to the last line, it talks about the Guam Academy Charter School Council should not exceed appropriations. But if DOA is the one that's, I guess, dispersing the money, should there be some language in there about exceeding appropriations? Is DOA, should that be included in there as well?
If you follow it, the charter schools submit their documents. They got to keep tab of what they're asking for, that they don't exceed what they're authorized, because DOA won't issue anything else they don't have money for. I mean, Mr. Byrne, you may want to speak on that part.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think this sentence is trying to do two jobs. One is to restrict the number of pupils that the school's council can authorize, which it does, but I think it also is trying to restrict the amount of money that's in the fund by the number of pupils too. So maybe the author would consider putting schools council and school fund.
Does it answer that question? I can ask the Vice Speaker if she want to make comment to that?
Yeah.
Or unless
Yeah.
you want to make the motion for amendment.
No, I agree with that
You agree with
question.
that? So I'll pose that to the Vice Speaker if you want to make that amendment. Mr. Byrne, if you can please repeat so that,
I understood. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we are here to make the amendment to make it stronger, I definitely, if my colleagues want to put any amendment forth, I recommend that they can, recommend that they put the amendment forth.
Or perhaps we can have legal counsel give advice on that, the language, the specific language. I would probably defer to the legal counsel.
you referred to legal counsel?
Yeah, because I think
Okay.
even just the the wording I think, might be problematic.
So if you can, Senator Perez, if you can meet with legal and Mr. Byrne, and we'll continue on with, just so until this is settled, and then we'll come back for motion to adopt it. Senator Tello,
Thank
you
you,
have
Mr.
an amendment, I know that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, is it okay to proceed?
We can't until it's settled. Okay, Senator Shelton, you want to speak on the main amendment? Yes, please.
Okay. Situus Masi, Mr. Chair, and I too support this amendment. I'd also like to offer an amendment to this amendment. On the second page, I was working with legal, so they are, with the clerks, so they are passing it around right now. On the second page,
So you're going to be making an amendment to the amendment,
yes,
correct?
yes,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
So they're
They're going to
passing,
make copies right now.
they're making copies right now? Okay. So why don't we take a couple minutes recess while everybody gets all their documents? Thank you. We are back from recess. Senator Amanda, your amendment has been
Satish Masi,
circulated.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chair. So it is on the second page of the original amendment, the line that reads, "Upon receipt of invoices, DOA shall verify accuracy of the invoice and report its findings to the respective Academy Charter Schools," and then to add, "and the Guam Academy Charter School Council, within 10 working days of receipt of said invoice prior to the release of funds," and then to add, "the Guam Academy Charter School Council, upon receipt of the report from DOA, approve either full or partial allotment, period."
Okay. You also have it written down further to allow legislative council to make technical correction as needed, correct? Okay, I just. They just passed it out. Does any member would like to speak on the amendment? No, this is Amanda's amendment to the amendment. Senator Amanda's amendment to the amendment. And any member wish to speak? Any objections to the amendment to the amendment? Senator Kelly, you want to hear it again?
Yeah, since I don't see it, can I hear it one more time just to make sure
Okay,
I've
okay.
understood it fully?
Okay, you'll find that the addition are double underscored on the second page of the amendment.
It still says TCS.
Right, on this page,
And then it's double
and then if you follow along with it, all she did was, she actually brought a little bit more clear to the full intent of the whole amendment, but, which is okay. So you don't have any questions, right, Senator Kelly? Okay. Is there anyone like to speak to the amendment? To the amendment. Senator Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It appears that there's additional requirement from this amendment, and if the sponsor of the amendment could just explain a little bit what the amendment will do.
Sure, thank you very much. Or I'll yield to the
Yes,
question, Mr.
yes,
Chair.
Madam Speaker. I mean,
Okay.
Senator.
Thank you very much. I think that when we look at the whole amendment that was offered, while I was looking at it, I was thinking the actual council, the functions of the council would no longer be needed, and I wanted to ensure that we had this extra step by having, allowing the council to look at this one more time, that we'd be working a little more prudently, a little more efficiently, to allow the council to do that.
Thank you. Does any other colleagues, just a little administrative oversight, on the front page, TCN should have said ALS. So is everybody, does any member want to, yes, Senator Kelly?
Yes, so after having time to read through it a time or two to make sure that I was absorbing it well, I do have a question. Okay.
If you have a question, please state your.
Yes, so it seems to me that this is assuming, and of course we want all invoices to be verified and verifiable and to have gone through all the appropriate processes, but this seems to be assuming that they will be approved, and it's not saying that there might be some sort of happenstance where the invoice is not approved for whatever reason. So this is just saying there's only one action, basically, and that's to approve it and then provide either full or partial allotment. So it seems to me, and maybe I'm missing something, but it seems to me that that's just automatically assuming that all invoices are going to have fulfilled their intention.
Senator Kelly, are you asking that on that one part where it says DOA shall verify accuracy, that they don't have a choice but to, when they look at it, it's okay? They only have an option of paying out or not, or partial? I mean, is that what you're assuming? Or did you want that written in where they say verify and deny? I mean, what is your amendment that you wanted to put in there that you're asking that question, so that my colleagues can understand why it's not clear to you, so that Mr. Burns right here, and he'll answer the question if you need his support on that one.
Well, I guess my question would be, is there ever such an instance where an invoice would not be approved?
Yes, Senator, if the invoice or the purpose of the invoice conflicted with existing law, it would not be approved.
Okay, so if there is such an instance where it conflicts in some way, it seems to me, and maybe, like I said, maybe I'm missing something, but it seems to me that that the only step seems to be to approve the full or partial allotment and report its findings.
So do you have an amendment, Senator Kelly? Do you have an amendment? I can see where you come from, but do you have an amendment so we can put that in there, so bring more clarity?
I hadn't thought about an amendment, but I suppose I could work with the author on that, on the amendment, so that it provides that opportunity. And then that leads me to look at the latter section also, where it says, if DOA fails to report its findings, then the invoiced amount shall automatically be transmitted. It seems like there might be a problem with that section as well, that it's again assuming that there isn't going to be an issue with the invoice. But I can work with the authors on amendment if it's needed.
I'd ask Mr. Byrne to respond to some of your comments. Senator Kelly, Mr. Byrne will respond to your concerns.
Senator, up to the passage of the recent law, GDOE had to report its findings within 10 days, and if they didn't, then DOA was required to make payment. So this really just transfers that responsibility to DOA to conduct its investigation and reach its conclusion within 10 days. Otherwise, the payment would be required to be made.
So, Senator Kelly, do you have an amendment? I can understand where you come from, but Mr. Byrne had explained that if you don't verify in 10 days, they failed. They got to pay it. In other words, they got to do their job and get it verified, get it accuracy, and get that payment out within 10 days. That's what it's saying. So did you want to do an amendment, Senator Kelly? I understand. Not really, but you want to. I can see where you come from, Senator Kelly. I would ask the author of the amendment, to yield to that. Would you like to yield, Senator Amanda? Okay. Senator Kelly?
So I think we're saying that if we just simply add in a couple of words,
Okay.
so upon receipt of the report from DOA shall approve or disapprove either full or partial reimbursement.
Approve or disapprove, right? Madam Senator?
Correct.
Okay,
Okay.
approve or
But-
disapprove. Okay. Does,
I have a point of inquiry.
yes, ma'am, Madam Speaker?
Mr. Chair, are we allowing the council now to approve or deny? Because I don't think that was, is that the intent?
My understanding is this is from DOA? A report from DOA, approve or disapprove? Am I correct? With the sponsor
Are we
of the?
asking the council
Thank you,
to-
Mr. Chair. Would still allow DOA to provide that function, but this amendment would give us just one more layer of a safeguard and allow it to go back to the council for that last step. I think in one of our last sessions when we were addressing a couple of charter school bills, we were a lot of our colleagues were very concerned about accountability and transparency for these charter schools. And so I've offered this amendment to help ease some of those concerns and to help us really, like I said earlier, to work prudently and efficiently and ensure that these funds are accounted for.
Okay, my colleagues, why don't we regroup one time? We are going to settle your amendment and any additional amendment, because we're not going to do an amendment to an amendment to amendment and just keep on going. We need to settle one. Because you have an amendment to her amendment, let's dispose of yours, and if any of my colleagues wants to add an amendment to that amendment, it's after your amendment either passes or fails. Okay? Because we're starting to run away with other amendments, and we need to come to terms exactly what we need to do. All right? So does anyone have anything to say about the Shelton Amendment? Senator Therese.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the intent of this amendment, but it is a little confusing to me because it just very much adds another step in addition to the DOA review of the invoice, DOA application of the rules of what's supposed to be approved pursuant to existing law, and DOA is the one who cuts the check. Is that right? Yeah, so DOA is cutting the check. So they can cut that right after their review as opposed to sending it back to the council, and I'm not sure what the parameters that the council are going to use. I mean, it's not in front of us. It might be in another law, but it does seem like it's either allowed by law and they've chosen to use that money in that way, or it's not allowed by law, right? Or they've exceeded their limit. And so for me, unless there's something else we want to look at, that we're judging this payment on, I feel like that's kind of the latitude we're going to have to give these charter schools, unless I'm not familiar with what the abuses were in the past either. So if we need an additional review, I just can't imagine that we need an additional review on top of DOA. Even though they don't agree with me, Mr. Byrne is very accurate. No kidding.
Thank you, Senator Therese. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment, the Senator Shelton Amendment?
Mr. Chair, is there an objection?
No, I'm just asking if there's anyone wants to speak on it, and Senator Parrish would like to speak.
So
Yeah, there is a concern.
I have a point of inquiry regarding procurement for charter schools. So after we passed the law, or we passed the bill regarding separation from DOE. So I think what's at stake is more of the transparency in the procurement process. I mean, it's related to
The amendment?
the amendment, because
Thank you.
I think, the intent is to provide more transparency in how money's spent. And, we just heard that DOE overspent by $2.6 million. And I think all of us probably could be in agreement that we do want to assure more accountability. So I'm just wondering, is there something in the process to assure that they're, because the invoice is like the last step, right? It's basically dispersing of money. It's not really the front end of things. So I think maybe that's part of the concern is how are we assured that the procurement process is done properly? This is just the disbursement of money, and we just want to make sure that there's some sort of accountability. So I guess my question is, what other safeguards are there when it comes to the use of funds, public funds? And that would probably be for Mr. Byrne.
Senator, thank you. Obviously, it's reasonable to rely on the schools themselves and their governing bodies to adhere to all the rules and regulations of which you're concerned with. I think the issue with GDOE was that they were applying the rules as they themselves saw them and applied them, and that's what held up some of the payments in the past. As far as DOA is concerned, so long as the school demonstrates that it has complied with, one, their rules and regulations, and two, hasn't contravened any public policies, then it is, and like I mentioned before, that the invoice itself isn't in conflict with existing law, then it would be normal to make the payment to the school. And if we didn't make the payment to the school, well, we certainly found out that when GDOA were holding up payments in the past, the schools themselves got into financial difficulties. Or, you know, the 10 days had passed and we were required to make the payment anyway. And that requirement is still here, right? If the 10 days passes, we're still required to make the payment.
So just to clarify, so if you do find that they're not complying with law, and you report that in their findings, does that stop the invoice necessarily, or no?
There are occasions when we believe that we've been presented with an invoice which does conflict with existing law, and we have sent the invoice back to them to either conform it to the law or tell us why they feel that it does conform to the law. And we've done this within the 10 days, so the payment hasn't yet been made.
So do you feel that that process is sufficient to provide some sort of checks in the system?
It seems to work. We haven't had a whole lot of problem in the last few weeks since we've adopted the new procedure after the passage of the recent law. I think it's been working quite smoothly.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yes,
I would
ma'am.
just suggest that we separate these amendments. There are two in here, and one seems without objection. The other one might be, so if we could just separate those
Which
two.
amendment are you referring to? The amendment?
The Shelton amendment, she has two parts where she's adding language. So, yeah, I would just suggest we separate those. That would be easier, I think.
Senator Shelton.
Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw the second part of the amendment, and I'll work further with our colleagues to fix it. And if we can just act on the first amendment, which is after, in the sentence, DOA shall verify accuracy of the invoice and report its finding to the respective Academy Charter Schools, and then to add, and the Guam Academy Charter School Council.
Okay, so you've drawn the second part, you kept the first part. Does any member like to speak on this amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment that was proffered by Senator Amanda Shelton?
Object.
Are you objection? Okay. Okay, okay, we got your objection, but let me apologize. Let's go back just a little bit. the motion to withdraw the second part of our amendment. There being no objection, so passed. Now we're back to your amendment to the amendment, that there is an objection. No, we have to settle yours first, Senator Shelton.
Can you just,
I-
Mr. Chair, just a point of information, if she could just restate, I don't know how we ended up with
Yes.
3 amendments.
If you can please restate your amendment
Sure,
so
Mr.
that we
Chair.
know which one to take off on our paper.
I asked to withdraw the second part of the amendment, which was the bottom half, so I'd like to keep the first part, which is still on the second page in the sentence, upon receipt of invoices, DOA shall verify accuracy of the invoice and report its findings to the respective academy charter schools, and then to add, and the Guam Academy Charter School Council within 10 working days of the receipt.
There is a motion for the amendment. Do we have any objection to this amendment? No objection? Pass? Okay. Let's see where we're at now. We'll go back now to the main amendment of Senator Nelson as amended. Does anyone want to speak to that amendment? The main amendment, with the amendment? None. Are there any objection to the main amendment with the amendment? No objection. So pass. Senator Nelson, I know you have your hand up, but we have also another amendment, but go ahead, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The pages have a copy of this, if they could hand it out to my colleagues. It's on Section 4, and the amendment is to read, Section 4, all fiscal year 2020 funds appropriated to the charter school may be used to support the payment of prior year obligations.
Madam Vice, you have a Section 4? I only have a Section 3.
Section
so-
4?
You're going to add a Section 4? You're
Yes.
adding a Section 4?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, it's still going around. We also have Senator Tello Tarigui has an amendment that's already passed out to everyone, so.
So, Mr. Chair, are we in recess? Okay, I would just talk about it since.
Yes, please, if you
seems
can. It's a real
almost
simple one, I know
Everyone
that.
has it. This is to add Section 4, line 4, page 19, and it reads, all fiscal year 2020 funds appropriated to the charter school may be used to support the payment of prior year obligations.
Does any of my colleagues would like to speak to this amendment? None? Are there any objection to this amendment? There being none, pass. Senator Tello, your amendment, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, forgive me, Mr. Chair, I wasn't, I think we're still on,
No, there was no objection to your amendment?
okay.
Oh, you still have the floor? Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
I think I still have the floor.
Okay.
I have another amendment here, and this is to add a new section 5. This is in concern with the appropriation of the GDOE textbooks. We closed that chapter, so we're including it in here to ensure that the charter schools get their textbooks. I missed the gavel, and so the clerk should be passing it out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
My colleagues, we are back from recess. We are now at Vice Speaker Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the amendment reads to add a new Section 5 to Part 2 of Chapter 2 of the bill. And it says, Section 5, the funds appropriated to GDOE, and Section 7 of Part 1 of this chapter for the purchase or development and production of textbooks and instructional materials shall also be expended by GDOE for the Academy Charter Schools as defined in 17 GCA subsection 12103 Bravo for the same purpose. So I didn't have an opportunity to put this amendment when we were discussing DOE, which is why we spent a little bit more time discussing the textbook situation before you gavelled down. So conferred with legal, and they said this would be the best place to put it now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Any member would like to speak on the amendment? If none, is there any objection to this amendment? Any objection, or do you want to speak? Senator Kelly, would you like to speak, Senator Kelly? Senator Kelly?
Well, I just want to point out, it seemed to me, based on my recollection in our discussion with GDOE, that they were still looking at that, and it was not clear to them. So maybe others feel it is clear, though?
This would make it clear, because this would be on the Budget Act, and it'll be public law. It would just clear all that air. Is there any objection to this amendment? There being none, motion passes. Senator Vice Speaker, you have an amendment to what we already passed, your amendment. And I know you wanted to make an update, I guess, or amendment to your amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I beg the indulgence of my colleagues. Just to ensure that the charter school also is able to use the appropriations that they had for fiscal year 19, the amendment that we just passed prior to was on Section 4, where it says all fiscal year 2020 funds appropriated to the charter school may be used to support the payment of prior year obligations. Can my colleagues please just indulge me and pull this up? I spoke with the OFB director, and he said it would also behoove you to include fiscal year 2019 to pay off prior year obligations. It looks like they will be receiving, they have money there also for charter schools for 2019. So if I can just amend it to include all fiscal year 2019 and 2020 funds appropriated, Mr. Chair. So I'm including the year 2019.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Is there somebody raised?
Point of information.
Yes, Senator Torres, ma'am.
I wonder if we might want to refer to the code, because I'm looking at 17 GCAF, and that already contains the language that all fiscal year 2019 funds appropriated to the charter schools may be used to pay prior year obligations. And I believe it was the last notation where it notes the source. It was amended by Public Law 35029 on July 2019. So I believe, just looking at the code, it's already in there. We may want to just double check for 2019.
All right, let's take a short recess and have legal verify, and then we may not have to use the amendment. My colleagues, we're back from recess. Vice Speaker Nelson, on your amendment?
I'm going to withdraw my amendment, Mr. Chair. I spoke with legal, and I'd like to thank the previous speaker for bringing it up. It is already in current statute. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Does my colleagues have any questions for Guam Academy Charter School? Guam Academy Charter School. And do we have a motion to withdraw? Any objection? There being none, so motion passes. Any question for Guam Academy Charter School Council? Yes, ma'am. Senator Tello. We're now, do you have an amendment, ma'am? Okay. Yours. You have
Yes,
the floor.
Mr. Chair. Sorry, I was just taking a restroom break. I do have an amendment I'd like to proffer.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Chair, it was already passed out to my colleagues. And this amendment would be on page 9, line 3, to add a new section. And after all the other amendments that were proffered in this section, I guess it would fall under Section 6.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chair, it was brought up earlier by one of our colleagues about the concern of, accountability and transparency. And I agree with that. In fact, when we had the public hearing on a bill that passed into law, there was a big concern by most of us that by taking away DOE, there is really no accountability to oversee the charter schools and what they're doing, even though DOE did not have the authority to stop the payment to these charter schools. There is a charter school council that is put into place for renewals on charter schools, to oversee their activity, to provide any kind of information or assistance to ensure the transparency is there by this council. But unfortunately, Mr. Chair, the council has not met in so long or even had enough for a quorum. They've had, I think, 3 chairmen in the last 2 years for the charter schools. So the Charter School Council was put into place, to assist the schools. They're not there to hinder them. They're ensuring that transparency and that the rules and regs are followed, what is incorporated into law. So what my amendment simply does, Mr. Chair, is, and I'd like to thank OFB too for recognizing this and incorporating the funding source, which I'll have to make an amendment to this amendment. But the amendment simply allows the council, and it reads, a new section, G, is added to Chapter 12, Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, to read as follows. G, the council shall hire an executive director to administer the provisions of the chapter. The council shall establish duties, responsibilities, compensation for the executive director. The executive director shall meet the following qualifications. 1, graduated with a bachelor's degree or higher in education, public administration, or closely related field or discipline from an accredited institution recognized by the Council for Higher Education accreditation, or its successors, and to have no less than 3 years of management experience in the field of education. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to this amendment too as well. I didn't have enough time to write it out, but it would also incorporate this position will be funded by the Department of Administration as appropriated in Chapter 5G, subsection 2 of Bill 186. And that section is on page 54 of the budget bill, Mr. Chair, where it identifies the funding for this position. I was talking to Mr. Byrne earlier, and we talked about the compensation, the amount for this individual, and I think through the Competitive Wage Act, it would be something that they would follow in assessing the compensation for this executive director. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if I will have legal type out that section or to incorporate it into the amendment. But, yeah, okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Does any of our members, my colleagues, like to speak to this amendment? Senator Torres?
I just want to, can the move of the amendment repeat the funding source identified on page 54? I didn't quite catch that.
Yes.
Sure.
Senator Tello, you?
On page 54, under Department of Administration,
Where? 54?
page 54 of the budget bill, you'll notice section 11, where it says charter school administrative support. The sum of $150,000 shall be allocated from the Department of Administration fiscal year 2020 appropriation to fund the clerical and administrative support provided by the Department of Administration, including but not limited to the administrative office, conference room, office equipment, furnitures, and supplies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, for my colleagues, that's page 54, line 25, that talks about the charter school administrative support. Does any of the members would like to speak to this amendment?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I believe there was an amendment put forth, and now we're entertaining an amendment to the amendment.
Correct.
That amendment to the amendment, which identifies page 54 essentially in the bill, shows the breakdown of appropriation for DOA specifically for the charter school, for the Charter Schools Council, the support personnel. Is this an out of order? Because I've had an amendment for page 54 to identify additional requirements for the appropriation for personnel that would be supporting the Charter School Council. So are we looking at page 54 as well, or are we looking at this amendment right here? That's, for you, Mr. Chair, that's my question to you.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. The amendment before the identification of page 54 would have been sufficient.
Mr. Chair, if I may, point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
It's basically my amendment on page 19. What it does is this amendment just explains what it's intended for, and it cites the location of the funding source. That's all it does. And I was told that this would be the section to incorporate this amendment.
I understand where you're coming from, Senator Tello.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Prior to you identifying page 54, it is appropriate, but when you start identifying further down the line on the bill, it's not in order. So if you didn't have the amendment to the amendment, it would have been okay, because you didn't identify a funding source, and there would not be a need, because just explaining to you on page 54,
Then, Mr. Chair-
DOA would look at this page on who they're
Then,
hiring.
Mr. Chair, if that's the case, and if you feel that it's more appropriate that I wait until we reach page 54 of the budget bill to make this amendment,
Yeah, do
and to, I mean, it's kind of awkward, because then what doesn't make sense is that we're on page 54 when it talks about the appropriations. So this is just to clarify if
Only because, but I understand where you come from, Senator Tello. but
I'll be
because-
happy to withdraw my
We're-
amendment,
we're only
Mr.
on
Chair,
page-
and
okay.
incorporate it when we reach to page 54, if that's the case. But I was told that this would be the place to put this amendment in there.
If I can get just
So let me know what is more conducive to you, and I'll be happy
And
to.
let me ask the legal. Thank you. My colleagues, we are back from recess. Senator Tyree, Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I listened to the concerns of some of my colleagues as well as legal, and though page 54, we're not there yet, talking about the funding source, it's obvious the funding source goes directly to Department of Administration. And it explains on that exactly what's it intended for, administrative support, clerical, etc. So, Mr. Chair, I'm striking out that second part that shows where the appropriation is coming from here and completely striking that out. And just maintaining the amendment that I passed out that is typed and underlined, which would just allow the council to hire an executive director. And if they do hire one, it shows what qualifications is needed. Now, how are they going to hire this executive director? What are they going to use? Well, it'd be nice to have an executive director who's free, but I don't know if it's going to happen that way. But this gives an opportunity for the council at least to hire one and then seek funding through maybe the Department of Administration, because it does show that they do have some money for this, and then it will be at the discretion of the Department of Administration whether they want to fund this or not. So my amendment is just a simple amendment, just allowing the council to move forward in doing something like this. And this, Mr. Chair, is exactly what I heard from previous chairwoman actually, of the council, that they need this help. They need some administrative assistance to the council to help them through this. So, Mr. Chair, again, it's just striking out the last section and just incorporating G that says the council all the way up to 3 years of management experience in the field of education.
Thank you, Senator Tello. There's a motion to remove the amendment to her amendment. Are there any objections to that? There being none. Does any member like to speak on Senator Tello's amendment? Senator Torres, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment prescribes that the council shall hire an executive director. It is in no way a suggestion. It is, in fact, the way it's written, a mandate. And what is also very important to note is that it is not only a mandate, but it's an unfunded mandate. And so in that regard, based on our rules of engagement here, I would object to this amendment on the grounds that it is providing for something without a revenue source, and it is in fact by its design, its language, an unfunded mandate. So I object to this amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does any other members would like to speak on this amendment? Senator Castro, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment, if I may. Strike the word shall and replace it with may. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First line of G, the council may. So strike shall and replace it with may.
There's an amendment to the amendment, striking the word may instead of shall hire, may hire. Does any members choose to? Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just like, on the basis of this amendment to the amendment, I'd like to just proffer or ask a question of the author of the original amendment.
Senator Teller, would you yield to that question?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So the whole basis of this initial amendment is that the council is in dire need of a manager, of an executive director to assist with the organization of the council, to help them get off the ground, and that it's really necessary. So this amendment to the amendment makes it optional. So I just wanted to know, is it a need or is it a want? Because this new amendment is kind of iffy.
Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that question. You know, after my conversations with not only one chairman of the council who's no longer there, but a prior council member as well, this is something that is most definitely needed. There are boxes actually somewhere floating around that the prior chairman has that doesn't know where to put it. There's nobody there to be consistent with what is happening at the council. And this only brings that consistency to the council. Having an executive director there provides that consistency, provides that historical knowledge moving forward, and ensures that if there's anybody who doesn't show up for a board meeting, which they have quite a bit of difficulty doing, they can quickly notify the oversight chair or even notify the governor that we need to put another board member there because this board member is not showing up and we're not being able to meet quorum. So this is definitely needed for a matter of history, data, information, and the ability to provide that information to incoming members that come in to sit on the board. So it's a definite need from both prior chairmen of the council who requested this.
Thank you. Senator Lee, did that suffice?
So, Mr. Chair, was that an objection to the amendment to the amendment?
No, you mean from Senator Castro? No, there was an objection to the amendment from Senator Torres, but then...
Yeah, no. So, Mr. Chair, I guess what I'm trying to wrap my mind around, is it a need? If it's a need, then we need to keep the shall in there. But if it's a maybe, then why are we considering this amendment? That's my question, Mr. Chair,
Well,
just
Mr.
for
Chair,
the body.
I believe...
So, member,
Yes, thank
may
you.
the author please clarify if there's
Sure.
a need or...
As I explained earlier, the need for one is requested. Unfortunately, the funding source that was supposed to be appropriated for this position was diverted to the Department of Administration. We've been working with OFB on finding someone to sit in this position and finding the funding source. And I thank the Department of, or your office, Mr. Chair, to find that 150 to provide for this position. But what happened was, in the bill, that funding went directly to Department of Administration. Now, there is a need for it, and there's also a need for some funding. And hopefully, if the council, they may hire an executive director, it gives them the guidelines on what the position will qualify for, and then they can go to Department of Administration and ask for funding for this position. Now,
Did that kind of answer your... Thank you. Does anyone... Yes, Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just several things. One, I've heard concerns about the level of accountability. And then two, I heard concerns about the personnel there to support it. In the level of accountability, Mr. Chair, it already is in law that the charter schools must follow procurement law. And if they don't, then of course they'll be accountable for it. And it says in 17 GCA, Chapter 12, you must secure appropriate insurance and to make contracts and leases, including agreements to procure or purchase services, equipment, and supplies, subject to, and it continues. And then in Title 5 GCA, Chapter 5, the recent public law, when we separated charter school from DOE, clarified that they are supposed to be audited. So in this section, pursuant to subsection 1908, Chapter 19, Title 1 GCA, the public auditor is authorized to supervise audits, or the public auditor's discretion exercises or authority to make the selection of auditing the firm or organization. And really, this is something a little bit curious because this is a nonprofit organization that we're looking at these schools, right? But we are putting in these extra government accountability measures to ensure that they are doing things right. Secondly, the concern for lack of personnel. Last term, and perhaps even the term before that, we had issues getting council members to attend. We even had issues getting council members reappointed. And we've tried many times with that administration. Please send us an appointment. Please help us to make members attend. You've had numerous roundtable meetings, Mr. Chair, with I hate to, I don't want to say it, but we say it so many times, like there's a division here, but with the corresponding vice chair that you selected, which was an opposite party. So this division and this boundary that we keep on stating during this budget talk, I don't see it. And so what I'm saying is now we have a fully functioning council. And they're not just any Joe Schmo from the street, Mr. Chair. Absolutely not. We have a member from one of our prestigious banks who's a high performer. We have another member who's out of the University of Guam. We have several members who have shown their commitment to service in other government councils or boards. And so these are not people that we just randomly picked off the street that are incompetent. They're absolutely competent people. And they've come to the confirmation hearing with the vision and a mission in place and with the design. And speaking with those that we confirmed, we made it very clear that we know that there are challenges, but we are working to ensure that these challenges are met. And you did that exactly here today, Mr. Chair, when you provided appropriation for the Department of Administration, not only for an office, but for $150,000 to ensure that we can hire personnel to prioritize the needs of the council. So that's not just one person. This can fund 3 people. And so, Mr. Chair, that's my concern. I have a concern with this. We're taking away this flexibility. We're going on the guise that there's no accountability, which is absolutely not the case. We're going on the guise of history that shows that the council couldn't function. Well, we have a functioning council now who are very competent members of our community. So I'd have to object as well, Mr. Chair, to this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member like to speak to this amendment? There being none, Senator Tello, if you can close before we move to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In no way does this, take away any funding, as mentioned, from Department of Administration. It just allows, I'm sorry.
Senator Tello, we need to close on Senator Castro's amendment first on the May. And I think I asked earlier if there was no objection. There was no objection, so that one carried. So please continue, Senator. I apologize.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I mentioned, well, first, the people that we appoint, or not that we appoint, but that the governor appoints, or that is up for confirmation to sit on the board of the charter schools, I'm pretty sure they are competent to do so. But some of them, sometimes some things happen and they're not able to fulfill their obligation. I'd really like to know what happened in the last 3 years of why it's been so difficult for the council to get together and meet quorum. And this has been going on for quite some time. Mr. Chair, this doesn't take away the funding that was given to Department of Administration to provide the service or assistance, clerical or any obligation at all. It doesn't take away from there. It just allows the council, very simply, to hire an executive director, may hire an executive director to administer the provisions of the chapter of this council. That's all it does. There was many of us who was concerned when the last bill that was passed regarding charter schools about accountability and providing the assistance they so desperately wanted and needed. And if I'm not mistaken, there was one individual who's just recently been confirmed who supports administrative director, who is now a board member of the charter school and supported administrative director. Mr. Chair, you know, if I had enough time, I'd probably call every single board member that's just been elected to the charter school and ask them, do they need this executive director? And I bet you 10 to 1 that all of them will say, yes, we do need one. I don't understand the reason why something as simple as this would be objected to. It just gives the council the authority, the ability to hire one. And then where they're going to get funding, well, I guess they'll have to go to the Department of Administration and ask them for the funding, because on page 54 of this bill, it gives them $150,000 to do so. But it doesn't mandate them to do so. So, Mr. Chair, I ask my colleagues, if they're going to vote no on this bill, on this amendment, you got to ask yourself why. Why would you vote no on this? It just simply allows them to move forward on something they desperately need. Not want, but need. And I humbly ask my colleagues for their support, a support that has been reiterated by many chairmen of this committee, this board and council, and members of this council who've been asking for this for so long. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tello. On the motion to amend, are there any objections? I think there are 2 objections. There was identified by, is there any objections? Let me just ask it one more time. If I can see a show of hands, if there's any objections? We have 2, yes. All in favor of this amendment, please raise your right hand. 5. Motion fails. Ladies, my colleagues, are there any further questions for the Guam Academy Charter School Council? There being none, that's page 18 and 19 is now closed. We will now proceed to page 20, which is also chapter 2 under the Education Part 3, University of Guam. Senator Amanda Shelton, do you have anything you wanted to present in reference to the University of Guam? You have amendments? Okay. Do you have it? Okay.
Oh, okay. I do have amendments, Mr. Chair. I will work to get them copied and passed out now.
Okay. Senator Lee, do you have any questions for University of Guam?
Susan Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the clerks are passing out an amendment on line 14, page 21. And this is on section 4 regarding appropriations for aquaculture development and training center. And Mr. Chair, this amendment is very simple. It just adds 3 words, and it gives the University of Guam some latitude to be able to use this $115,000 that we're appropriating from the general fund to ensure that it assists their aquaculture development and training center, and it also includes any activities that might be done within the center. So it just gives them some room to be able to accomplish their goals. And so I ask my colleagues for their support on this amendment. That's page 21, line 14.
Does any members like to speak to this amendment? Speaker Tina Mooney Barnes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, and I just want to say I stand and rise in support of this amendment. I think that when we look at the development of aquaculture and seeing what resources it could bring into the University of Guam, and also as it continues to get the needed resources so that we can literally lead a successful program, I think that this would be good for the community. And as we look for new resources coming in, this is definitely one of those areas of training and development that we can look at. And I think the university could be really be the lead in looking at continued operations for this aquaculture development. Mr. Chair, this was a very successful program in the past, and for some reason or another, it got set aside. And I just believe in my heart that this aquaculture development and training center, if re-synergized and reactivated, will do good for not just the university, not just the students, but the community in general. So I want to say thank you to the good authors of this proposed amendment, and I support the whole section 4 and the related activities to it. Sijus Masi.
Thank you, Speaker. Senator Therese, did you want to make? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just have I guess an inquiry on this section, because the original language is to appropriate $115,000 to an aquaculture development and training center. And we are expanding that use to now include aquaculture-related activities. And I guess I'm not sure what those mean, and I'm not sure what that means, what kind of activities we're talking about. But my concern is because I'm pretty sure it was your bill, Mr. Chair, that we just, we had a hearing on, and that was to expand the land for the aquaculture facility.
That was the hatchery.
So is that different than the aquaculture? I guess that's one of my questions, Mr. Chair, because that's how they describe it.
Senator Lee, would you yield to that question?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, and I thank my colleague for the question. I think this very simple amendment, and again, it's proposed by myself and Senator Shelton, is just to give the University of Guam some flexibility in this area. And it's still very much related to the mission of the Aquaculture Development Training Center. It's still, the money will still go to the center, but I'm just concerned that if we don't clarify that, the monies could be made available for other purposes, and I just want to make sure that it's for aquaculture-related activities and for the training center.
Senator Therese, did that kind of answer your question? It's related to the hatchery.
Sorry, yeah, so Mr. Chair, just
Same, right?
It's within the hatchery, the aquaculture.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yes.
Okay.
It's just to allow them the flexibility, exactly as Senator Lee has brought up.
All right, well,
Okay?
I just hope it's not for aquaculture-related activities, like, I don't know. Mr. Chair, they seem to have not needed that language for all these years, and in fact, the whole premise behind the land, getting, the additional land, is because they were going to enter into this public-private partnership. I'm even wondering if they need this money at all at this point, because that was the big rush, is that they need to enter into a public-private partnership to expand their facilities, to do all these things, and that it was funding that they were going to get in this type of arrangement. So, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Therese. I would hope that the oversight chair would be watching over the hatchery once we can get that passed. Vice Speaker, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm not going to oppose this amendment, but I am going to say something. We have several realities that UOG specifically has faced us with. One, when we did that bill for the hatchery, they were telling us that it's not going to require any additional money and so forth. I think I think that's what I heard. I might have to go back to public record, but I could have sworn even last term that's what I heard. And then two, the reality of UOG saying that if they don't get this full appropriation, that they're going to have to increase tuition. And so University of Guam also did go through a new election of a president. And the whole, one of the justifications for hiring a president off island was that he had the network capability to reach out, expanding outside of Guam to grow the mission and vision of the University of Guam. Those are one of the reasons why we decided to go outside and not hire our own local people. And so now here we are today, addressing some of these shortfalls for what I feel that the University of Guam president should be acting on, which was one of the reasons why he was hired. Thirdly, I want to readdress this tuition issue. They come and they're telling the students, we are going to raise the tuition because the legislature will not give us $6 more million in appropriation. Well, you know, I'll tell you what might come with those $6 more million. Maybe not directly, but later on, salary increases. And so, really, where is your priority? We're still, up to this day, funding areas or projects, which is the whole basis of hiring an off-island president should be finding these resources. And it's not even a lot of money, which is exactly my point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Vice Speaker, does anybody like to speak in reference to the amendment? Senator Amanda, in reference to the amendment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
As the author of the amendment stated, this is an amendment for us to give the Aquaculture Department a little more flexibility. In the long term, I have, along with you and some of our other colleagues, introduced a bill to allow the University of Guam to enter into public-private partnerships, which will, in the long run, help make the university more money and allow the hatchery to really flourish into what it's meant to be and what it's capable of. And in the meantime, if the hatchery were not able to survive in these next couple of months until the time that hopefully that bill will pass and allow them for that PPP, then we can't even look at going into a PPP because the hatchery no longer exists. So I urge my colleagues to please support this amendment so that we can keep the hatchery open and allow them the flexibility that they need to operate.
Thank you. Does any other member like to speak to the amendment? Senator, no closing yet. It's Senator Lee's amendment, but Senator Tello,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
speak to the amendment.
Thank you. You know, I have some concerns about this. It hasn't really had an opportunity to have a public hearing regarding this change. So I'm going to object. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak reference to the amendment of Senator Regina Lee? There being none, would you like to close, Senator Lee? No closing? There is a motion to amend line 14, page 21, section 4. We do have an objection. All in favor of this amendment, please raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, right there, back there. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 8. Amendment passes. Now back to Senator Shelton. Madam Senator Shelton, you have an amendment? Or Senator Lee, you still have the floor. Ma'am, you have another amendment? Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I believe the second amendment that I have has been passed out on page 23 of the bill, and it's lines 22 to 27 to amend the bill, and this is with regard to UOG capital improvements. It's the Capital Improvement Fund appropriation. So while it's being passed out, we just want to again give UOG the flexibility within this appropriated amount. So it would go to cover either one, the UOG Capital Improvement Fund for fiscal year 2020 for the purpose of paying rental payments due to the under the leaseback agreement pursuant to public law, and or two, UOG operational requirements in fiscal year 2020. This just also gives the president of the university, or it requires the president of the university to provide a breakdown of the amounts requested for either subsections 1, which is the Capital Improvement Fund, or 2, the operations. He would have to report that to the director of BBMR no later than September 30th, 2019. So again, this gives UOG the flexibility to work within this category in the same way that other agencies are being given kind of a lump sum appropriation. He just needs to report what he has done with it to the director of BBMR no later than September 30th of 2019.
Does any of my colleagues like to speak to this amendment? Senator Therese?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I understand the intent of this amendment, but it just kind of highlights for me whether UOG really has a need for our TEFF to continue to fund their capital improvement projects, especially when we know they have a foundation that has been created and specifically for those purposes. And I know that one of these, I'm not sure if this one or the appropriation right before this for the debt service on another capital improvement project, used to be funded when it started, it was incurred as an obligation of the Guam Highway Fund. And then I think in the recent budget, Speaker Cruz, helped us to change that over. But I still wonder if, it just seems to highlight that if they're going to use it for operations instead, that maybe these TEFF funds shouldn't be used for those purposes. I mean, I guess I want to echo one of the previous speakers on the previous amendment. It's kind of like we're being told by UOG that they're going to raise tuition, if they don't get certain things. And when I had heard that and I was reviewing their budget, I'm wondering, well, we're still paying for capital improvement projects up there, and we can take this money and put it to tuition if that's the case, I don't know. And I guess I just want to know, so if this is a request from the president that, I don't know, it signals to me, Mr. Chair, and I guess I would ask you at OFB, do they have a need for this funding for this capital improvement, or are they able to cover it with their, some other fund up there, like their foundation fund?
Thank you. Senator Lee, before you answer that, I'm going to ask...
well, I'm asking OFB if they know.
I'm just about to answer that, Senator Therese. My colleagues, if you look on page 23, on line 22 to 27, if you want, you can take a minute, just read that paragraph, and I think it kind of answers that. And I'm looking, so if we follow the amendment, it's asking for UG to give the breakdown. So, Senator Lee, but let me ask the OFB first to respond to her question, then, okay?
And just real quickly, a point of information, Mr. Chair, for my colleagues, we've heard time and time again from the University of Guam that they have not, under the previous administration, been receiving their cash allotments. And so they have made allowances in other areas that have put aside money that could have been used for maintenance. They have deferred on other things. And so this is just one opportunity for us to give them a little bit more flexibility within this category. So yeah, I guess OFB can also chime in.
Steve, if you can answer the question.
Yes, Senator Terlahi. The TEF actually funds two of UOG's payments out of the Territorial Education Fund, and that's strictly for the debt service. We continue the fund source of the TEF to pay for the debt service because it was funded in 2019, and we thought that it was probably the appropriate fund at the time to go ahead and continue using that fund as the payment for this debt service. Because if I'm not mistaken, it was the TEFF that sort of like was designated to guarantee the fund source for the debt service when the debt was taken out.
But my question is whether OFB knows whether this capital improvement project can be covered instead of from the TEFF, but through their own capital improvement funds, their foundation funds.
That is something that I guess we're going to have to work with UOG and find out for the people up at UOG whether or not that is something that can happen, whether or not the foundation actually has sufficient funding to cover this debt and relieve basically the TEFF from that responsibility.
Or allow us to straight out put it towards, against a tuition hike.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You're right.
So, and Mr. Byrne, I think you said earlier, if you could just confirm that you were going to be releasing all of the 2019 allotments for DOE and UOG in the next few weeks.
Yes, Senator, we wrote to them yesterday confirming that was the case. With the exception of funds due under the TEFF fund, which shows a deficit, so the funds are going to be there. But from the general fund amounts, that's correct.
Oh, so for the TEFF, which agencies then will not be getting their full allotment for FY19?
It's the educational agencies.
All of them?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And that's do you know the shortfall then for UOG and the TEFF? So what is DOE going to do with their shortfall in the TEFF? They just cut expenditures, is that correct?
That's correct, and we advise them of this
early on.
Yes, like 3 or 4 months ago.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does any other member like to speak, reference this amendment? On the amendment? Senator Lee, would you like to close? Oh, Speaker, you would like to speak again? You already supported the amendment, if I'm correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh,
Just want to say that I support
that was
the
the last one.
amendment.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes.
I support the amendment.
You support the amendment? Okay, Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just implore my colleagues, every time that we go out on the campaign trail, people ask us, what is our priority? And education is always at the top of everybody's list. So now we're given an opportunity to say that we want the University of Guam to be able to have some flexibility, some latitude to move within this category and be able to make the maximum use of this money that's appropriated to them. I think some of the challenges in the past have been this body has appropriated the funding to them, but they haven't received it. And so because of those issues, there are some things that they've put off. And we want to give them the full opportunity to cover all of those things and to really support education in the way that we always say that we do. And so I ask my colleagues again for their support on this amendment. Sijos Maasi.
Thank you. On the motion to amend line 2227, page 23, under the University of Guam, are there any objections? There being no objection, you're going to object? Okay. for, I guess she caught that gavel going down. I give her that. Will all, please, all in favor of the amendment by Senator Lee, lines 22 to 23, page 23, please raise your right, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to offer an amendment to this amendment.
You want to do an amendment after she
Yes.
close?
Yes,
Okay.
if she'd allow. We're co-sponsors of the amendment.
Oh, you, oh, okay. Okay, so I guess we're not voting yet, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just have 1 minute?
My colleagues, we're going to take I'll make it a 15-minute, and the purpose is they're going to basically reset the media, and then we'll get back. Thank you.